The twin suns of Zoraxia cast their golden light over the crystal palace, illuminating its spired towers and cascading waterfalls of liquid energy. Inside the throne room, King Zelrin sat in solemn contemplation. His golden scales shimmered faintly, a stark contrast to the cold fire in his eyes as he gazed at the stasis pod before him. Within it lay his Gambale human from a distant world called Earth. "This is her last chance," Zelrin muttered to his trusted advisor, Vraxer. "If Alira cannot prove her worth, she will never survive in this kingdom. The nobles already doubt her. I must see her rise, or she will fall." Vraxer inclined his horned head, his expression unreadable. "And you believe this human will achieve what no Zoracian tutor could?" Zelrin's jaw tightened. "Humans are strange creatures. Fragile, yes, but resilient. This one, a soldier, has endured wars beyond our understanding. He will teach her the strength she needs or she will fail, and we shall know she was never destined to lead." Alira's chambers were a world away from the throne room. Unlike the rest of the palace's opulence, her quarters were modest, reflecting her lowly standing among her siblings. She stood by her window, gazing out at the fiery Zoracian landscape. Her thin frame and muted scales marked her as different from her family. Even her telepathic abilities, a hallmark of Zoracian royalty, were weak and sporadic. A sharp knock at the door startled her. It was her father's emissary, a stern-faced guard named Threx. "Princess Alira," he said, his voice clipped. "The king summons you to the Hall of Decisions." Her stomach churned. The Hall of Decisions was where fates were sealed, alliances, trials, executions. Why was she being summoned there? When she arrived, her father loomed before the glowing stasis pod. His golden armor gleamed under the chamber's pulsating lights, and his eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of a Zoracian storm. "Alira," he said, his voice reverberating through the hall. "I have grown weary of your weakness. This kingdom has no room for fragile leaders. So, I am giving you a gift and opportunity." The stasis pod hissed and released a burst of cold vapor. Inside, a figure began to stir. Alira stepped back instinctively, her eyes widening. The creature was bipedal, like her people, but its skin was smooth and pale, its hair dark and matted. It was smaller than she expected, but its build was dense with muscle. The human blinked, his gaze darting around the room, sharp and assessing. "This," Zelrin announced, "is Jake, a soldier from the planet Earth. He is yours to command, to learn from, or to fail alongside. He will train you, teach you the ways of combat and strategy that your own people have failed to instill in you. Do not disappoint me." Alira swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if I fail?" Zelrin's expression darkened. "Then you will prove to the court that you are unworthy of your title, and you will be cast aside. This is your last chance, Alira. Do not waste it." The human was strange to behold. His movements were deliberate, his gaze unnervingly direct. When Alira led him to a private courtyard where they could speak, she found herself struggling to meet his eyes. "My name is Jake," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You're Princess Alira, right? Your father told me about you." Alira bristled. "And what did he tell you?" Jake shrugged. "Enough to know this isn't going to be easy for either of us." She frowned, unsure whether to feel insulted or relieved by his bluntness. "And what makes you think you can teach me anything?" He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Because I've been through worse than this. And if you're willing to work, I can help you survive whatever your father's trying to prepare you for." There was something in his tone that disarmed her, a blend of confidence and exhaustion that hinted at battles fought and scars earned. For the first time, Alira felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this human could help her. "Fine," she said, straightening her shoulders. "We'll start tomorrow." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Why not now?" Her hesitation betrayed her. I'm not ready." Jake crossed his arms, his expression softening. Let me give you a piece of advice, Princess. You're never ready for the fight. You just step into it and figure it out as you go. That's the first lesson. Alyra stared at him, his words sinking deep. She nodded, her resolve hardening. Then let's begin. As the sun set over the palace, the courtyard filled with the sounds of their first training session footsteps, grunts, and the clash of practice blades. For the first time in her life, Alyra felt like she was taking control of her destiny. Little did she know, the path ahead would challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine, and the human at her side would become far more than just her teacher. The training ground behind the palace became a world of its own. Under Zoraxia's twin sons, Alyra and Jake worked tirelessly, their routines grueling and unrelenting. The once quiet courtyard now echoed with the clash of weapons, the crackling hum of Zoracian energy blasts, and the sharp commands of the human soldier. Jake was a relentless teacher. Each day began at dawn, with Alyra balancing on narrow crystalline beams above pools of kinetic energy designed to test her agility and focus. By midday, she practiced hand-to-hand combat, her punches and kicks growing sharper with each strike. Afternoons were spent mastering Zoracian staff techniques infused with energy manipulation, a skill Jake found both fascinating and terrifying. Alyra, who had always been delicate and self-doubting, began to change. One afternoon, Jake leaned against a pillar, watching Alyra practice a sequence of movements with the Zoracian combat staff. Her strikes were faster now, each one accompanied by a crackle of energy that sent tremors through the air. Sweat glistened on her scaled skin, her movements precise and fluid. She had improved drastically in just a few weeks, but Jake wasn't about to let her rest on her laurels. "Your stance is off," he called out. Alyra stopped mid-strike, glaring at him. "I've done this sequence 100 times. It's perfect." Jake smirked. "Perfect? You're planting your back foot too early. That makes you vulnerable to a counterattack." Again. With a frustrated growl, Alyra reset her position and began again. This time, Jake stepped into the ring and swept her leg mid-motion, sending her sprawling onto the ground. "You're too predictable," he said, standing over her. "A real enemy won't wait for you to finish your perfect little sequence. Adapt, Alyra. React. Don't just follow the script." She pushed herself up, her eyes blazing. "Maybe you could stop treating me like I'm one of your Earth soldiers." Jake crossed his arms, his expression calm but unyielding. "You want to survive out there? Then I'll treat you like someone who needs to survive. The enemy doesn't care about your title, your family, or your pride. They care about one thing: exploiting your weakness. Show me you don't have one." Alyra clenched her jaw, her hands gripping the staff tightly. She launched into the sequence again, this time breaking her rhythm mid-strike and spinning to land a surprising blow that Jake barely dodged. He grinned as her energy crackled around her like a shield. "Now you're getting it," he said. As the weeks passed, their training sessions grew more complex. Jake began incorporating Earth-style tactics, teaching Alyra how to analyze her opponent's weaknesses and exploit them. Meanwhile, Alyra taught Jake the basics of Zoracian energy manipulation. Though humans lacked the innate connection to energy that her people had, Jake's curiosity and adaptability impressed her. One night, after a particularly intense session, they sat by the edge of the training ground, overlooking the glowing Zoracian landscape. The air shimmered with residual energy, and the sky above was streaked with vibrant purples and blues. "Why did you agree to this?" Alyra asked suddenly, her voice soft. "To leave your home and come here?" Jake stared into the distance, his expression unreadable. "I didn't really have a choice. My unit was disbanded after a mission went wrong. When your father's people showed up, they made me an offer: serve here or fade away back home." Alyra frowned. "You sound like you regret it." He shook his head. "Not regret. Just, it's strange. Your world, your people, it's all so different, but in some ways, it's the same. Everyone's just trying to survive, trying to prove they're worth something. That's what you're doing, isn't it? She nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground. I don't have a choice. My father doesn't believe I can do this. He's waiting for me to fail. Jake looked at her, his voice firm. Then don't give him the satisfaction. You've got more fight in you than you think. I've seen it. His words struck a chord in her. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of real confidence, not just the determination to avoid failure, but the belief that she could truly succeed. The turning point came during a mock battle. Jake had designed an obstacle course filled with energy-based traps and automated drones that fired stunning blasts. Elira's goal was to reach the end without being tagged, but the drones were fast and unpredictable, forcing her to use every skill she'd learned. As she navigated the course, the obstacles grew more challenging. A drone fired a shot that grazed her arm, and she stumbled, gritting her teeth against the pain. Jake, watching from a distance, shouted encouragement. Keep moving, Elira. Use your instincts. Summoning her energy reserves, Elira activated a telepathic pulse, sensing the drone's movements before they attacked. She dodged left, then right, her staff spinning to deflect a blast. Finally, with a leap that sent her soaring over a field of kinetic mines, she reached the end of the course, her chest heaving with exertion. Jake approached, clapping his hands slowly. That, he said with a grin, was impressive. Elira smiled, a mixture of pride and exhaustion washing over her. For the first time, she believed she could be more than the weakling her father had always seen her as. She could be a warrior. Unbeknownst to them, eyes watched from the shadows. In the palace corridors, whispers began to circulate about the princess's progress and the human's role in her transformation. But not all who observed her rise were pleased. Dark forces within the kingdom were stirring, and Elira's journey was far from over. The atmosphere within the Crystal Palace had grown tense. Elira's training, while admired by some, had also begun to sow resentment among others in the court. Her transformation threatened the carefully balanced hierarchy of the royal family. Nobles whispered in hidden alcoves, their voices dripping with envy and suspicion. And among them was Virex, Elira's cousin and a ruthless contender for the throne. Virex had always dismissed Elira as inconsequential, a minor obstacle in his quest for power. But her growing reputation and the human's influence had changed everything. His sharp mind calculated a single truth: if Elira continued on her path, she could become a legitimate threat. He would not allow that to happen. Late one night, a cloaked figure approached the palace gates, blending into the shadows cast by Zoraxia's twin moons. The figure moved silently, avoiding patrols and weaving through the labyrinthine corridors until it reached Virex's private quarters. Inside, Virex awaited with a sinister smile. "Do you have it?" he asked. The figure handed him a vial filled with a pulsating, iridescent liquid. It was mind-enhancing serum, banned across the galaxy for its dangerous and often lethal effects. Virex eyed it greedily, his plan solidifying. Soon, he whispered to himself, the throne will be mine. The attack came on the night of Elira's 18th cycle, the Zoracian coming-of-age ceremony. The palace was adorned with glowing banners and energy fountains, and nobles from across the kingdom had gathered to witness the event. Elira, resplendent in ceremonial armor that shimmered like liquid crystal, felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. Jake stood nearby, his watchful gaze scanning the crowd. "You ready for this?" Jake asked. Elira took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The ceremony began with King Zelran addressing the court, his booming voice echoing through the grand hall. Elira stepped forward to kneel before him, the weight of her family's expectations pressing on her shoulders. But before the ritual could proceed, the palace was plunged into chaos. Explosions rocked the outer walls, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The ornate glass ceiling above shattered, raining shards onto the stunned crowd. Panic erupted as armored warriors loyal to Virex stormed the hall, their weapons blazing with stolen energy. Jake grabbed Elira's arm, pulling her behind a column for cover. "Stay low," he shouted. But Elira's instincts had already kicked in. Gripping her staff, she charged into the fray, her energy crackling around her like a shield. She deflected a blast aimed at a group of nobles, spinning to disarm her attacker with a well-placed strike. Jake followed close behind, using his earth-honed combat skills to neutralize the invaders with brutal efficiency. Meanwhile, Virex, enhanced by the serum, moved through the chaos with terrifying speed and precision. His strikes were devastating, his movements almost a blur. He fought his way to the throne, where King Zelrin stood defiantly. "Virex!" Zelrin roared, his golden scales gleaming with energy. "You dare betray your bloodline? This kingdom needs a real leader," Virex sneered, his voice distorted by the serum's effects. "Not a relic and certainly not your weakling daughter." Their battle was a clash of titans, but the serum gave Virex an unnatural edge. He overpowered Zelrin, knocking the king to his knees. As Virex raised his weapon for a final strike, a surge of energy blasted him back. Elira stood at the edge of the throne platform, her staff glowing brighter than ever. "If you want the throne," she said, her voice steady and commanding, "you'll have to go through me." Virex laughed darkly, the serum fueling his arrogance. "You're no match for me, cousin." "Maybe not alone," Elira said, glancing at Jake, who nodded and moved to flank Virex. The battle that followed was a test of everything Elira had learned. Virex's enhanced speed and strength made him a formidable opponent, but he underestimated Elira's growing telepathic abilities. Using the techniques Jake had drilled into her, she anticipated his moves, evading his attacks with precision and striking where he least expected. Jake provided crucial support, using his tactical mind to outmaneuver Virex's soldiers. Together, they pushed Virex to his limits. But the serum was taking its toll. Virex's movements grew erratic, his attacks wild and unfocused. "You can't keep this up," Elira said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The serum is destroying you. I'd rather die than see you on that throne." Virex snarled, lunging at her with a desperate fury. In a final, decisive move, Elira sidestepped his attack and delivered a telekinetically charged strike to his chest. The blow sent Virex flying across the hall, his weapon clattering to the ground. He collapsed, the serum's effects leaving him unconscious and broken. The battle was over, but the palace lay in ruins. Soldiers loyal to the king quickly subdued the remaining rebels, and the nobles, shaken but alive, emerged from their hiding places. King Zelrin, battered but unbowed, stepped forward to address the court. "Tonight, my daughter has proven herself not just as a princess, but as a warrior. She fought not for power, but for the safety of this kingdom. Let it be known that Elira is worthy of her place in this family and in this throne." The crowd erupted in cheers, their earlier doubts about Elira swept away by her bravery and strength. Jake, standing at her side, gave her a rare smile. "Told you you had it in you." Elira smiled back, a new confidence shining in her eyes. For the first time, she felt she had truly earned her place not just in her family, but in her own heart. The morning after the siege, the Crystal Palace was alive with activity. Soldiers repaired shattered walls, servants swept away debris, and the glow of energy fountains returned to the corridors. Despite the lingering scars of battle, the atmosphere was one of triumph. Princess Elira had emerged victorious, and her people now looked to her with a newfound respect. In the royal chambers, Elira stood before a grand mirror, her ceremonial armor replaced by flowing robes of Zorasian silk. The fabric shimmered like starlight, reflecting her transformation from a frail, overlooked princess into a powerful and capable leader. Her reflection startled her. It was the first time she truly recognized herself. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Jake entered, dressed in a clean, simple uniform, a stark contrast to the opulence around him. He gave her a small smile. Nervous? He asked. Elira turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. Not nervous. Just different. I've spent so long trying to prove myself. Now that it's happened, I'm not sure what comes next. Jake shrugged. You lead. You protect. You keep proving to them and to yourself that you deserve this. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Jake. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you. His smile widened. Maybe. But don't sell yourself short. You had it in you all along. I just helped you find it. The coronation ceremony was held in the Great Hall, now fully restored to its former glory. Nobles and commoners alike filled the chamber, their voices a low hum of anticipation. At the far end of the hall, the crystal throne glowed with a soft, ethereal light. King Zelrin stood beside the throne, his golden scales gleaming under the radiant chandeliers. When Elira entered, a hush fell over the crowd. She walked with purpose, her head held high, her staff now a ceremonial scepter adorned with intricate carvings. Jake followed at a respectful distance, standing with the royal advisors as Elira approached the throne. Zelrin's voice rang out, strong and commanding. Today, we honor not only the bravery of our people but the strength of a leader who rose when we needed her most. Princess Elira has proven herself worthy of the title of warlord, a defender of Zoraxia and its people. He gestured for her to kneel. As she lowered herself, he placed a glowing crown of crystalline energy on her head. It pulsed with a soft light, responding to her newfound strength and confidence. Rise, Warlord Elira of Zoraxia. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the hall. Elira stood, her heart pounding, not with fear but with determination. She turned to face her people, her voice steady and clear. Today, we begin a new chapter for Zoraxia. One of strength, unity, and peace. Together, we will face whatever challenges come our way, and we will prevail. The crowd cheered louder, their faith in her unmistakable. After the ceremony, a grand feast was held in the palace gardens. Laughter and music filled the air as nobles mingled with soldiers and commoners. Elira moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and exchanging words of encouragement with her people. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the path ahead. Later that night, as the festivities wound down, she found Jake standing alone at the edge of the gardens, gazing up at the twin moons. Not much for celebrations, she asked, joining him. He shrugged. Not really my thing. Besides, this is your moment. She looked at him, her expression serious. You're as much a part of this as I am, Jake. I want you to stay. Jake turned to her, surprised. Stay? Yes, she said firmly. Not just as my mentor, but as an advisor. Zoraxia needs people like you, people who see the world differently, who challenge us to be better. He was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right. But only if you promise me one thing. What's that? He smiled. Never stop fighting. No matter what. Elira returned his smile. I promise. As the moons rose higher, Elira stood at the balcony overlooking her kingdom. The stars above seemed brighter, the air charged with a sense of possibility. For the first time, she felt ready not just to lead, but to shape the future of Zoraxia. Her journey was far from over. Challenges would come, and enemies would rise. But she knew, with Jake by her side and her people behind her, she could face whatever lay ahead. The weak princess was gone. In her place stood a fearsome warrior, a leader who would guide her kingdom into a new era.